The fever hit Katherine Norton 3 days after she buried her brother in the hard Oklahoma soil, and by the time she collapsed in the doorway of the general store on a scorching July afternoon in 1882, her body was burning hot enough to scare every woman in Oklahoma City who tried to touch her forehead. The shopkeeper's wife took one look at Katherine's flushed face and glassy eyes before stepping back, shaking her head and muttering something about not wanting to catch whatever disease this stranger had brought to town. Within minutes, Katherine found herself alone on the wooden sidewalk, people walking around her prone form like she was nothing more than an obstacle. And she might have died right there if Daniel Ashford had not been riding past on his way back from a cattle drive that had taken him through 3 territories and left him exhausted but flush with payment. Daniel saw the woman lying there, saw how people avoided her, and something in his chest tightened with an anger he had not felt in years. He dismounted quickly, his boots hitting the dusty street with a solid thunk, and he knelt beside her without hesitation. Her face was pale beneath the fever flush, and when he touched her forehead, he jerked his hand back at the intense heat radiating from her skin. She was young, probably not more than 22 or 23, with dark hair that had come loose from its pins and spread around her head like a halo. Her dress was travel-worn and dusty, and he could see the remnants of dirt under her fingernails, the kind that came from digging in hard earth. "Miss," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Miss, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes the color of storm clouds, but they did not focus on him. She mumbled something incoherent, and Daniel made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He scooped her up in his arms, ignoring the weight of her body against his tired muscles, and carried her toward the boarding house where he had been staying between jobs. Mrs. Sullivan, the landlady, met him at the door with her arms crossed and her expression stern. "I am not running a hospital, Mr. Ashford," she said, but Daniel was already pushing past her. "I will pay double rent," he said flatly. "She needs help, and I am the only one willing to give it, Mrs." Sullivan's expression softened slightly as she looked at the unconscious woman in Daniel's arms. "Room 7 is empty," she said quietly. "I will bring up some clean water and cloths, but I am not nursing her. I have got children to think about." Daniel nodded and climbed the stairs to the second floor, his legs protesting with every step. Room 7 was small and sparse, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair. He laid Katherine down gently on the bed and immediately began loosening the high collar of her dress so she could breathe easier. Her skin was so hot it seemed impossible, and he knew without a doubt that she would die without constant care. "Mrs." Sullivan brought up the water and cloths as promised, along with a bucket and some towels. "There is a doctor in town, but he is out at the Morrison Ranch delivering a baby," she said. "Could be gone for days." "Then I will do what I can myself," Daniel replied, already soaking a cloth in the cool water. For the rest of that day and through the long night that followed, Daniel stayed by Katherine's side. He had never nursed anyone through a fever before, but he had seen it done during the war years when he was barely old enough to understand what death meant. He remembered his mother tending to soldiers who had been left behind when the army moved on, remembered how she had kept them cool and hydrated, how she had fought for their lives with nothing more than water and determination. He bathed Katherine's face and arms with the cool cloths, changing them every few minutes as they grew warm from her fever. When she thrashed and called out in delirium, he held her hands and spoke to her in a low, steady voice, telling her she was safe, that someone was there, that she needed to fight. Her words made no sense at first, just fragments about graves and promises and being alone, but gradually Daniel pieced together that she had lost someone recently, that she was far from home, that she had nowhere else to go. As the sun rose on the second day, Catherine's fever showed no signs of breaking. Daniel's eyes burned with exhaustion, but he refused to sleep. He sent word to the saloon where he sometimes played cards that he would not be around for a while, and he asked Mrs. Sullivan to bring up broth and tea when she could spare it. The landlady's attitude had changed after watching Daniel's dedication through that first night. She brought food not just for Katherine but for Daniel as well, and she occasionally sat with him for a few minutes, offering advice about fever care that her own mother had taught her. "My grandmother used to say that a fever is the body fighting," Mrs. Sullivan said on the afternoon of the second day. "If it breaks, she lives. If it does not, well." She did not finish the sentence, but Daniel understood. "It will break," he said with a conviction he did not entirely feel. The second night was worse than the first. Catherine's fever spiked higher, and she began to shake despite the heat pouring off her body. Daniel piled every blanket he could find on top of her, then removed them all when she started sweating so profusely that the sheets became soaked. He changed the bedding twice, lifting her carefully each time, struck by how fragile she seemed and how much trust she was placing in him without even knowing it. He talked to her constantly during those dark hours, telling her about his life on the range, about the cattle drives and the open sky, about the time he had seen a tornado form in the distance and had to ride hard to escape it. He told her about his family's farm in Missouri, which he had left at 16 to find his fortune out west, and how he had never quite found it but had never regretted the searching. He told her things he had never told anyone, secrets and dreams and fears, and in the darkness of that room with only a single lamp burning low, it felt like they were the only two people in the world. By the third morning, Daniel's hands were shaking from exhaustion, and his vision occasionally blurred. Mrs. Sullivan tried to convince him to rest, offering to watch Katherine for a few hours, but he refused. He had made a silent promise to this woman, and he would not break it. He had seen too many people abandoned, too many left to die alone, and he would not let her be another one. Catherine's fever remained dangerously high through the third day, and Daniel found himself praying for the first time since he was a child. He was not a religious man, but desperation made believers of everyone eventually. He prayed to whatever God might be listening that this woman would live, that his efforts would not be in vain, that she would open her eyes and see him, and know that someone had cared enough to stay. The third night stretched endlessly. Catherine's breathing became labored, and Daniel had to prop her up with pillows to help her get air into her lungs. He spooned tiny amounts of water into her mouth, making sure she swallowed, terrified she would choke. His own body screamed for sleep, but he pushed through it, fueled by coffee that Mrs. Sullivan kept bringing up and by sheer stubborn will. It was during that night that Katherine began to speak more clearly in her delirium. She talked about her brother, about how they had come west together after their parents died, seeking a new start. She talked about how he had been killed in a ranch accident just outside Oklahoma City, crushed beneath a spooked horse, and how she had no money to get home, no home to return to anyway. She talked about being alone, truly alone for the first time in her life, and the fear in her voice even in unconsciousness made Daniel's heart ache. "You are not alone," he whispered to her, smoothing her sweat-dampened hair back from her forehead. "I am here. I am staying right here." The fourth day dawned gray and cloudy, threatening rain that never came. Daniel's exhaustion had moved beyond physical discomfort into a strange, detached state where everything felt slightly unreal. He continued his care mechanically, changing cloths, offering water, checking her pulse, but his mind drifted in and out of the present moment. He caught himself nearly falling asleep in the chair several times and had to stand up and pace the small room to keep himself awake. Mrs. Sullivan brought up lunch and took one look at him. "Mr. Ashford, you are going to collapse yourself if you do not rest," she said firmly. "I cannot," Daniel replied simply. "Not yet." "She would not want you to kill yourself caring for her," Mrs. Sullivan argued. "She does not know me well enough to want anything regarding me," Daniel said. "But I know myself well enough to know I could not live with myself if I quit now." The landlady shook her head but said nothing more. She had grown fond of this stubborn cowboy who cared so deeply for a complete stranger, and she found herself hoping the girl would live if only so she could know what Daniel had done for her. The fourth night was when Daniel truly began to doubt. Catherine's fever remained relentlessly high, and she had stopped responding even to his voice. Her lips were cracked despite his best efforts to keep her hydrated, and her breathing had become shallow and rapid. He found himself memorizing her face, the curve of her cheekbones, the way her eyelashes cast shadows on her pale skin, preparing himself for the possibility that come morning, she would be gone. He held her hand through that endless night, feeling her pulse flutter weakly beneath his fingers. He told her about the sunrise over the plains, how the sky turned colors that did not seem possible, orange and pink and purple all at once. He told her about the wildflowers that bloomed in spring, covering the ground like a painted carpet. He told her about all the beautiful things in the world that she could not leave behind yet, all the reasons she needed to fight and live and wake up. As the fifth day broke, Daniel was barely conscious himself. He had not slept in 5 nights, had barely eaten, and his body was shutting down whether he wanted it to or not. He slumped in the chair beside Catherine's bed, his hand still holding hers, and his eyes finally closed despite every effort to keep them open. He dreamed of fire and ice, of running through endless hallways searching for something he could not name, of voices calling to him from places he could not reach. He woke with a start to find the room dimly lit by late afternoon sun and Catherine's gray eyes looking directly at him. For a moment he thought he was still dreaming, but then she squeezed his hand weakly and whispered, "Water." Daniel nearly knocked over the chair in his haste to get her water. His hand shook as he held the cup to her lips, supporting her head while she took small sips. Her fever had broken. He could feel it in the coolness of her forehead when he touched it, could see it in the clarity of her eyes. "You are awake," he said, his voice rough from disuse and emotion. "Thank God you are awake." Catherine looked at him with confusion clear on her face. "Who are you?" she asked. "Where am I? My name is Daniel Ashford," he said. "You are in Oklahoma City in a boarding house. You collapsed 5 days ago with a fever. No one else would help, so I brought you here." Her eyes filled with tears. 5 days, 5 days, he confirmed. 5 nights. You stayed with me." The disbelief in her voice was painful to hear. "I did not leave your side," Daniel said. "I could not." Catherine's tears spilled over, running down her temples into her hair. "I do not even know you. Why would you do that for a stranger?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, searching for the right words. "Because everyone deserves someone to stay," he finally said. "Because I have seen too many people die alone, and I could not bear to see it happen again. Because when I looked at you lying there with people stepping over you like you did not matter, something in me decided you did matter, even if I did not know your name yet." "Katherine," she whispered. "Katherine Norton." "Katherine," he repeated, and the name felt right in his mouth like he had been meant to say it. "You need to rest more. Your fever just broke and you are still very weak." "Will you stay?" she asked, her voice trembling with vulnerability. "As long as you need me to," Daniel promised. He helped her drink more water and managed to get her to eat a little broth that Mrs. Sullivan brought up. The landlady cried when she saw Katherine awake and hugged Daniel so hard he grunted in surprise. "I will bring up proper food," she declared, "and clean sheets and anything else you need." Oh, thank the Lord, she pulled through. After Mrs. Sullivan left, Katherine looked at Daniel seriously. "You have not slept in 5 days. I could not risk it," he said. "Someone needed to be watching over you. You could have died yourself," she said. "That was foolish." "Probably," Daniel agreed, "but I do not regret it." Something shifted in Katherine's expression, a softening that made her look younger and more vulnerable than before. "I do not know how to thank you," she said quietly. "I have nothing to give you, no way to repay this kind of debt." "There is no debt," Daniel said firmly. "You owe me nothing, Katherine. I did what anyone should have done." "But no one else did," she pointed out. "Only you." Daniel could not argue with that. He stood up carefully, his muscles protesting after days in the chair. "I should let you rest now. Mrs. Sullivan will look in on you, and I will be just down the hall if you need anything." Panic flashed across Katherine's face. "You are leaving, just to sleep," he assured her quickly. "I am in room 4, but you are safe now, Katherine. The danger has passed." She nodded slowly, but he could see the fear in her eyes, the terror of being alone again. On impulse, he moved the chair closer to the bed and sat back down. "Or I could stay a while longer," he said, "until you fall asleep." The relief on her face was answer enough. Daniel sat with her as the sun set outside the window, as the room filled with purple shadows, as her breathing evened out into the deep rhythm of healing sleep. Only then did he finally allow himself to stand up and walk down the hall to his own room, where he collapsed onto his bed still fully clothed and fell into a dreamless sleep that lasted 16 hours straight. When Daniel woke, the sun was high in the sky and someone was knocking on his door. He stumbled to answer it and found Mrs. Sullivan with a tray of food. "Miss Norton has been asking for you," she said with a knowing smile. "She has been awake for hours and refused to eat until she knew you were all right." Daniel took the tray gratefully, suddenly aware of how hungry he was. "How is she?" "Weak but improving," Mrs. Sullivan reported. "The fever has not returned and she has been keeping down broth and tea. I think she will make a full recovery, thanks to you." Daniel ate quickly and washed up before heading to room 7. He knocked softly and heard Katherine's voice, stronger now, telling him to come in. She was sitting up in bed, propped against pillows, and her color was much better. She smiled when she saw him, and Daniel felt something in his chest respond to that smile in a way that both thrilled and terrified him. "You look better," he said, pleased at how true that statement was. "I feel like I have been trampled by a herd of cattle," Katherine said, "but I am alive, and Mrs. Sullivan tells me that is entirely because of you." Daniel shrugged uncomfortably. "I just did what needed doing." "You stayed awake for 5 nights straight," Katherine said. "Mrs. Sullivan told me everything. How you would not leave, would not sleep, how you fought for my life when you had no reason to care whether I lived or died." "I had reason," Daniel said quietly. "Maybe I could not explain it at the time, but I had reason." Katherine studied him with those storm-gray eyes, and Daniel had the unsettling feeling that she could see right through him. "I remember some of it," she said. "Like a dream, but I remember your voice. You told me stories about tornadoes and wildflowers and sunrises. You told me I was not alone." Daniel felt heat rise in his face. "I thought talking might help," he said. "Give you something to focus on, something to fight toward." "It did help," Katherine said softly. "In the darkness, your voice was the only thing I could hold on to. It kept me from drifting away completely." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Katherine spoke again. "Mrs. Sullivan said my brother is buried in the town cemetery. I have not been able to visit since before I got sick." Would you take me there when I am strong enough? Of course, Daniel said immediately. Whenever you are ready. Over the next few days, Daniel visited Katherine regularly, bringing her meals, sitting with her while she ate, telling her more stories about his life on the range. She, in turn, told him about growing up in Ohio, about her parents' death from influenza 2 years ago, about how she and her brother Thomas had decided to start fresh in Oklahoma Territory, hoping to claim land and build a farm. She talked about Thomas's death with tears in her eyes, how random and unfair it had been, how one moment he had been laughing, and the next he was on the ground with a horse's hoof print crushed into his chest. I buried him myself, Katherine said. The ranch owner gave me a shovel and pointed me toward the cemetery. Said he was sorry, but he could not spare any men for digging. So I dug the grave alone, and I lowered my brother into the ground alone, and I said the prayers alone. By the time I finished, I had nothing left. I came into town hoping to find work, or at least somewhere to stay, and then everything went black. Daniel listened with growing anger at how she had been treated, but also with growing admiration for her strength. You should not have had to do that alone, he said. But I did, Katherine replied simply. And now I am alone in every way that matters. Thomas was the last of my family. You are not alone anymore, Daniel said, the words coming out before he could stop them. Not if you do not want to be. Katherine looked at him with something like wonder in her eyes. Daniel, you barely know me. I know you survived, he said. I know you fought through a fever that should have killed you. I know you dug your brother's grave with your own hands and did not quit even when you had every reason to. I know you are stronger than you think you are. That is not knowing someone, Katherine said, but there was no real argument in her voice. Then let me get to know you, Daniel said. I am not going anywhere, Katherine. I have got some money saved from the last cattle drive, enough to stay in town for a while. I want to help you figure out what comes next. Katherine's eyes filled with tears again, but these were different from the tears of grief she had cried before. Why are you being so kind to me? She whispered. Daniel reached out and took her hand, marveling at how natural the gesture felt. Because from the moment I saw you lying on that sidewalk, something told me you were important, he said honestly. I have learned to trust those feelings. They have kept me alive more than once. As Katherine continued to recover, Daniel found himself spending every possible moment with her. He helped her take short walks around the boarding house when she was strong enough, supporting her when her legs trembled with weakness. He read to her from newspapers and dime novels that Mrs. Sullivan loaned them, doing different voices for different characters, until Katherine laughed so hard she had to hold her sides. He played cards with her, teaching her poker and rummy, and pretended to be surprised when she beat him soundly once she learned the rules. 2 weeks after Katherine's fever broke, Daniel took her to visit Thomas's grave. She leaned on his arm as they walked through the cemetery, past weathered wooden markers and a few proper headstones. Thomas's grave was in the far corner, marked with a simple cross that Katherine had made from 2 boards tied together with twine. She knelt beside it, ignoring the way her dress dragged in the dirt, and placed her hand on the mounded earth. Thomas, this is Daniel, she said softly. He is the man who saved my life. I wish you could have met him. I think you would have liked him. Daniel stood back, giving her privacy for her grief, but Katherine reached back and took his hand, pulling him down to kneel beside her. Thank you for this, she said. For bringing me here, for staying with me, for everything. You do not have to thank me, Daniel said. I do, Katherine insisted. Because I need you to know what it means to me. I need you to know that I will never forget what you did. They stayed at the cemetery until the sun began to set, Katherine talking to her brother's grave about their childhood, about their parents, about the dreams they had shared for their life in Oklahoma. Daniel listened and held her hand and realized somewhere in the midst of her stories that he had fallen in love with this woman. It was not a slow realization or a gradual awareness. It hit him all at once, like a physical blow, that he loved Katherine Norton with an intensity that frightened him. He had never been in love before. He had known women, of course, had enjoyed their company and their warmth, but he had never felt this bone-deep certainty that his life would be fundamentally incomplete without someone. The knowledge settled over him like a brand, permanent and undeniable, and he knew with equal certainty that he could not tell her. Not yet. She was still grieving, still recovering, still finding her footing in a world that had tried its best to crush her. She did not need the complication of his feelings added to everything else, but Katherine was not blind. As they walked back to the boarding house in the gathering dusk, she looked up at him and asked, "Daniel, why are you really staying in Oklahoma City? You are a cowboy. Should you not be out on the range somewhere?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "I am staying because I want to," he finally said, "because there is something here worth staying for." Katherine stopped walking and turned to face him fully. They were standing in the middle of the dusty street, the last light of day painting everything gold and amber. "Do you mean me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Daniel said, meeting her eyes steadily. "I mean you, Daniel," she began, but he gently interrupted. "You do not have to say anything," he said. "I am not asking for anything, Katherine. I just want you to know that you matter to me, more than I can properly explain. If you need me to leave, I will. If you want me to stay just as a friend, I can do that, but I will not lie to you about what I feel." Katherine was silent for so long that Daniel's heart began to sink, but then she stepped closer to him and placed her hand on his chest, right over his heart. "You sat with me for 5 nights," she said. "You fought for my life when no one else cared. You have been kinder to me than anyone has ever been, and you ask for nothing in return. How could I not care for you? Caring and loving are different things," Daniel said carefully. "Yes, they are," Katherine agreed. "And I am not sure yet which one I feel because everything is still so confused and raw, but I want to find out, Daniel, if you are willing to be patient with me." Daniel let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. "I can be patient," he said. "I can be anything you need me to be." Katherine smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "Then stay," she said simply. "Stay and let me figure out what comes next, together." From that evening on, their relationship shifted into something new and tentative. Daniel continued to stay at the boarding house, and Katherine got a job helping Mrs. Sullivan with cooking and cleaning to earn her keep. They ate meals together, took evening walks together, attended church socials together. The people of Oklahoma City, who had been so quick to abandon Katherine in her hour of need, now looked at Daniel with respect and admiration. The story of the cowboy who had stayed awake for 5 nights, straight to nurse a dying stranger, had spread through the small town, growing with each telling, and Daniel found himself something of a local hero, despite his protests that he had only done what was right. Katherine grew stronger every day, both physically and emotionally. The grief over her brother's death did not disappear, but it became something she could carry rather than something that crushed her. She laughed more easily, smiled more often, and slowly began to talk about the future instead of just surviving the present. One evening in early September, as they sat on the boarding house porch watching the stars come out, Katherine said, "I have been thinking about what to do next." Daniel, who had been dreading this conversation, kept his voice neutral. "What have you decided?" "Thomas and I came here to farm," Katherine said, "to build something permanent. I still want that even without him." The land office has parcels available for homesteading, and I have enough money from working for Mrs. Sullivan to file a claim. It will not be easy, but I think I can do it." "I think you can do anything you set your mind to," Daniel said honestly. Katherine turned to look at him, her face serious in the starlight. "I cannot do it alone, though. I need help building a house, plowing the fields, all of it. I need a partner." Daniel's heart was beating so hard he was certain she could hear it. "What are you asking, Katherine?" "I am asking if you would consider staying in Oklahoma City permanently," Katherine said. "I am asking if you would help me build a homestead. I am asking." She paused, gathering courage. "I am asking if you might want to build a life with me." Daniel was quiet for a moment, overwhelmed by the enormity of what she was offering. "Katherine, are you sure?" he finally asked. "A month ago you did not know I existed." "A month ago I was dying in a stranger's bed," Katherine said. "And you sat with me for 5 nights straight even though you did not know me, even though you had no reason to care. You showed me that there is still goodness in the world, Daniel. You showed me that I am not alone. And somewhere in these past weeks, I stopped being able to imagine a future that does not include you." "That sounds a lot like love," Daniel said, hardly daring to hope. "It is love," Katherine said firmly. "Maybe it happened fast, but nothing about us has been slow or ordinary. You saved my life, and now I want to spend that life with you if you will have me." Daniel stood up and pulled Katherine to her feet, holding both her hands in his. "Katherine Norton, I fell in love with you while you were burning up with fever and calling out for your brother," he said. "I fell in love with your strength and your courage and the way you refused to give up even when you had every reason to. I have been in love with you for weeks, but I did not want to rush you or push you into something you were not ready for." "I am ready now," Katherine said, and she reached up to cup his face with her hand. "I am ready to live again, Daniel, with you." Daniel leaned down and kissed her, gently at first and then with growing passion as she responded in kind. It was not his first kiss, but it was the first one that mattered, the first one that meant forever. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Katherine was smiling wider than he had ever seen. "We should get married," she said, "before we file the homestead claim. It will be easier if we are legally husband and wife." "Is that a proposal?" Daniel asked, grinning. "It is," Katherine confirmed. "Unless you want to do the asking." "No, I like this better," Daniel said. "Katherine Norton, I accept your proposal. I will marry you and help you build a homestead and spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." They were married a week later in a small ceremony at the town church, with Mrs. Sullivan and her husband standing as witnesses. Katherine wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Sullivan had helped her make, and Daniel wore his best shirt and a new vest he had purchased for the occasion. The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Daniel kissed Katherine like she was the most precious thing in the world because to him, she was. The homestead claim was filed the next day, and Daniel and Katherine spent the following months building their new life together. They chose a parcel of land 5 miles outside Oklahoma City, with a creek running through it and enough flat ground for farming. Daniel used his savings to buy lumber and tools, and with help from some of the men in town who had grown to respect him, they built a small but sturdy cabin with 2 rooms and a proper fireplace. Katherine proved to be an excellent partner in every way. She worked alongside Daniel from dawn to dusk, helping to plow fields and plant winter wheat, tending to the chickens and the milk cow they purchased, turning their cabin into a home with curtains and cushions, and all the small touches that made a house feel welcoming. At night, they would sit by the fire and talk about their plans for the future, about expanding the farm, about the children they both wanted, about growing old together on this land they were building with their own hands. Their first winter together was hard but not unbearable. They had laid in enough supplies to last until spring, and Daniel supplemented their stores by hunting. When the snow fell and they were trapped inside for days at a time, they found ways to entertain themselves with card games and stories and the simple pleasure of being together. Katherine told Daniel that she had never been happier, and he believed her because he had never been happier either. Spring came, and with it, new challenges and new joys. Katherine discovered she was pregnant in April, and Daniel's reaction was to pick her up and spin her around until she laughingly demanded he put her down. He became even more protective of her than before, trying to keep her from doing heavy work. But Katherine insisted she was perfectly capable of continuing her usual tasks for several more months at least. Their son was born in December of 1883, delivered by a midwife from town, with Daniel pacing anxiously outside until he heard the baby's first cry. Katherine was exhausted but radiant when he was finally allowed in to meet his son, and she placed the tiny, red-faced infant in his arms with complete trust. They named him Thomas Daniel Ashford, after both the brother Katherine had lost and the man who had saved her life. The years that followed were full and rich. They had 2 more children, daughters named Margaret and Elizabeth, and their farm prospered through hard work and determination. Daniel proved to be a natural farmer, and Katherine managed their household with the same strength and courage she had shown from the beginning. They faced droughts and storms, illness and setbacks, but they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Daniel took Katherine back to Oklahoma City for a rare evening out. They had dinner at the hotel restaurant, a luxury they rarely allowed themselves, and afterward they walked through the town that had changed so much since that hot July day in 1882, when Daniel had found Katherine dying on the sidewalk. "You ever think about that day?" Katherine asked as they walked hand in hand through streets now lit by gas lamps. "All the time," Daniel admitted. "It was the day my real life started." "Mine too," Katherine said. "I was so angry at first after I recovered, angry at all those people who walked past me who would not help. But now I think maybe it had to happen that way. Maybe I had to be abandoned by everyone else so that you could be the one to find me." "I do not believe in fate," Daniel said, "but I believe I made the right choice that day, the best choice I ever made." "It was the best choice for both of us," Katherine said. She stopped walking and turned to face him, much as she had on that evening when she had proposed to him. "You gave me back my life, Daniel. And then you filled that life with so much love and joy that sometimes I feel like my heart cannot contain it all." "I know the feeling," Daniel said softly. "Every single day I wake up grateful that I was riding past that store at exactly the right moment. Grateful that I was stubborn enough to stay awake for 5 nights straight. Grateful that you gave me a chance to prove that not everyone would abandon you." They kissed there in the middle of the street, surrounded by the bustle of a growing town. 2 people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and had built something beautiful from that desperate beginning. Their lives continued to unfold in the way of all lives, with moments of joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle. They lost Katherine's brother's marker in a storm and replaced it with a proper headstone, paid for by the thriving farm. They helped their children grow and learn, teaching them about hard work and kindness and the importance of standing by the people you love. They watched Oklahoma change around them, saw it grow from a territory into a state, saw their small farm become part of a larger community. Daniel never did return to the cowboy life he had known before meeting Katherine. He sometimes felt a twinge of nostalgia for the open range and the freedom of those years, but it was always fleeting. Everything he needed was right there on their homestead, in the woman who had become his whole world and the family they had built together. On the evening of Daniel's 50th birthday, as they sat on the porch of their much-expanded house watching their grandchildren play in the yard, Katherine leaned her head on his shoulder and said, "Thank you for staying awake for me." Daniel wrapped his arm around her and pulled her close. "Thank you for being worth staying awake for," he replied. "Do you think Thomas would be proud of what we built?" Katherine asked, a question she still asks sometimes even after all these years. "I know he would be," Daniel said with certainty. "You honored his memory by living, Katherine. By fighting and surviving and building something good. That is the best tribute you could have given him." Katherine nodded, her eyes growing misty as they always did when she thought of her brother, but the grief was old and worn smooth now, more bittersweet than agonizing. She had learned to carry it alongside the happiness, had learned that love and loss were not opposites but companions, two sides of the same coin. As the sun set over their land, painting the Oklahoma sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, Daniel thought back to that young cowboy who had dismounted his horse on a hot July day 22 years ago and made the split-second decision to help a dying stranger. That young man could never have imagined where that decision would lead, could never have predicted the depth of love and contentment he would find. "What are you thinking about?" Katherine asked, noticing his faraway expression. "Just about how different my life would be if I had ridden past that store 1 minute earlier or later," Daniel said. "If I had not seen you, if someone else had helped you, if any number of things had been different." "But they were not different," Katherine said practically. "You did see me, you did help me, and here we are. That is what matters." "Here we are," Daniel agreed, and he kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling the warmth of her body against his. Their oldest son Thomas came out onto the porch, now a man of 21 with a family of his own starting. "Mother, father, are you coming in for supper?" he asked. "Margaret made your favorite pie, Pa." "We will be right there," Katherine said, but neither of them moved immediately. They sat for a few moments longer, holding each other as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Two people who had found each other against all odds and had never let go. When they finally stood and walked inside together, Daniel held the door for Katherine as he always did, and she smiled at him as she always did. And in that simple moment was contained the entire story of their love. A story that had started with fever and abandonment and 5 sleepless nights, and had grown into a lifetime of partnership, devotion, and unshakable commitment. A story that proved sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay when everyone else walks away. And sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the simple act of caring for a stranger in need. Years continued to pass, as they always do, and Daniel and Katherine grew old together on their Oklahoma homestead. They buried parents and friends, celebrated the marriages and births of children and grandchildren, weathered economic hardships and personal losses. Through it all, they remained each other's constant, each other's anchor, the living proof that love built on a foundation of sacrifice and dedication could withstand anything life threw at it. When Daniel died at the age of 73, peacefully in his sleep after a long and full life, Katherine mourned him with the same intensity she had once mourned her brother. But she did not break, because Daniel had taught her strength, had shown her that she was capable of surviving anything. She lived another 5 years after his death, surrounded by the family they had created together. And when she finally passed, she was buried beside him in the cemetery where she had once buried Thomas all those years ago. On their shared headstone, their children had inscribed, "Daniel and Katherine Ashford. He stayed when others walked away." She lived because he would not give up. Together they built a love that death cannot diminish. It was not eloquent or poetic, but it was true, and truth was all that mattered in the end. The farm they had built together stayed in the family for generations, a testament to what two people could create when they chose love over convenience, commitment over comfort. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren and beyond. The story of the cowboy who stayed awake for 5 nights straight to save a dying woman, and how that woman became his wife, his partner, his everything. It was a story of the Wild West, of a time and place where life was hard and people were often harder, where survival meant everything and kindness was sometimes in short supply. But it was also a story that proved even in the hardest times and the harshest places, love could flourish if people were brave enough to reach for it, strong enough to fight for it, and stubborn enough to hold on to it no matter what obstacles stood in their way. Daniel and Katherine had been all those things, and their love story, which began with fever and desperation in the summer of 1882, became the kind of tale that reminded people that true love was not just something that happened in books and fairy tales, but something real people could find if they were willing to stay, when it would have been easier to walk away.